Welcome, everyone. My name is James Boland, and I'm the founder and president of the Australian Community. Our organisation has been around since 2011. Our mission is to connect Australians who are living in the United States, primarily here in New York and around the US. This is truly a global broadcast, and we do appreciate everyone who is tuning in. We do have a jam-packed agenda. We have immigration and taxation attorneys who will be speaking with us tonight. Thank you to everyone who have been sending their questions to us. Many of your questions have been aggregated, and for many, they've already been answered as well. I mentioned our YouTube channel. There have been a lot of questions that we've answered, especially around immigration through Zjantelle Cammisa Markel. Again, I urge you to go to the YouTube channel to look for those videos. It appears that a lot of the questions that you've been sending us are the same. So what we've decided tonight is to sort of group these into the top 10 questions that are being asked. Zjantelle Cammisa Markel is the principal of Cammisa Markel, which is a legal firm here in New York specializing in immigration. And we'll also be hearing from Peter Harper, who is the CEO of Asina Advisors. Peter will be speaking to us on Australian and US tax matters. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening at the moment. We'll also be making a number of announcements tonight, and you'll be the first to hear them. We hopefully will be crossing to Australia to speak to Jack Manning Bancroft, who's the CEO of the Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience. We also have a multi-talented Australian singer, musician and composer, star of stage and screen, Amelia Cormack, who will be doing a live performance for us. And just before we kick off our trivia competition later in the broadcast, we'll be crossing to LA for a celebrity interview with Nick Hardcastle. Nick, many of you know, is another star of stage and screen. He's been involved in the Australian arts community in Los Angeles for many years. Nick will be speaking to us about what is happening in LA right now. I'm going to look for Peter Harper.
I'm here. I'm just trying to work out how to unmute myself. So,
Peter, thanks very much for calling in. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment, with everything that's going on. I had sent you a few questions, and perhaps before we start, though, if you could just explain a little bit about Asina Advisors and your role there.
Sure. Thanks, James. Asina Advisors is a multifamily office, so we advise foreign families and foreigners that are moving into the US on inbound investments and tax matters.
And Peter, I understand there's really two tiers to Asina Advisors. You also have an organisation, Polo Tax.
We do. So we, James was consistently bugging me and telling me that I was charging people too much. So he's like, why can't you decrease your fees? So what we did was we founded a new accounting firm called Polo Tax about 12 months ago that is, leverages technology and a global footprint to deliver a service that I won't say is as good as the core of our business, but it's very high quality, value driven tax preparation service.
So really the folks that are doing their average tax returns and have some footprint in both the US and Australia, that's really geared to that type of expat rather than an expat who might have corporations, family trusts, etc.
Yeah, or anyone who just doesn't like spending a lot of money on tax.
And as I think you said once in one of our podcasts, anyone who pays the bills.
That's right.
Peter, obviously right now with COVID-19, with people being laid off and all the other happenings that are happening, returning to Australia, the big question that's coming out, what are the do's and don'ts of repatriation from a tax perspective?
The biggest thing around departing a country is always residency. So when are you going to cease to be a resident in one country and start to be a resident in another? Australia has released guidelines that are basically adjusting the rules to temporarily returning to Australia, so that I think there's kind of what I'm seeing is two categories of people that are still committed to maintaining a life in America, but that have decided, hey, listen, for various reasons, they may want to return to Australia temporarily. So ordinarily, if you were to return to Australia with the intention of being there permanently, you would be an Australian tax resident. The ATO is effectively adjusting the guidelines to say if it's COVID related, there is an ability to move in and out of Australia with not automatically becoming a resident. So that's probably the single biggest area as far as US Australia planning that we're seeing being directly sort of impacted by COVID.
We get a lot of questions from people who are either first-time US tax filers or Australians who are obviously now filing their Australian tax returns for last year. Is there a best workflow that you recommend for how to go about filing your Australian and your US tax?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on when you're filing tax returns in multiple countries is really more administrative and cash flow rather than I think administration and cash flow is just as important as tax planning and tax effectiveness, right? So technically, in order to claim a credit in America for foreign tax paid, you need to have paid the tax and filed the tax return. So for most of my clients that are that have assets in both countries, the process normally what they're doing is even if their personal tax returns due April 15, most of them will extend their return until October, get their Australian returns filed shortly after the end of the Australian financial year in June, and then file the US return in September, October. Now we're in a weird period because the tax deadline's been extended to deal with COVID. So the extended due date's been pushed out, the normal filing due date's been pushed out, as has the extended due date.
And of course, I know we've covered it a lot of times, but I think it's worth mentioning the whole thing about filing FBAR, FACTA, etc. I know that we don't want to go into a particularly lengthy discussion about this, but I think it's important to mention, what are the basics that people really need to understand about filing an FBAR report here in the US.
Sure. I think the biggest thing that differentiates the US tax system from most other tax systems is their information reporting regime. And so the comment that I hear from a lot of folks when they move here the first time, like, oh, wow, this is so different. I'm like, well, it's actually not that different from a lot of other countries. It's just that if America's the first country you're moving to after Australia, it's probably the first time that you've actually had to deal with international tax issues. That's a really important point. The US tax system is very similar to Australia in many ways. It's just that it for a first-time filer, it might be a new thing. So as a resident of the US, you have an obligation to pay tax on a worldwide basis. The way in which the US manages the audit risk around that is they have you file a number of different forms that are attached to a personal tax return that assist with the reporting of foreign bank accounts, foreign financial assets, and foreign structures, so foreign companies and foreign trusts. And so, the single biggest area of risk for new folks that are moving to the US is this information reporting regime, because failure to file these forms or incorrectly filing these forms carry pretty stiff penalties. Ranging from anywhere from 50% of the highest balance of a foreign bank account to 5% of the value of a foreign trust or company.
Peter, I know that we covered this in a podcast that we did, I think it was about 6 weeks ago or so, on wills and trust estate planning, etc. But obviously, I'm not sure if you're hearing them, but certainly within our organisation, we're hearing the stories of people who are passing of COVID-19 and not having a business continuity plan for their corporations. It's very, very distressing to hear these reports coming out. I probably, rather than drilling down on the whole issue of tax and estate planning and estate tax, etc., is probably just to refer people to our podcast on our website that we recorded, specifically around trust, wills, and people to really understand the implications of not having an American-friendly will, shall we say. perhaps, just very quickly, Peter, you could just speak to that, just add a little bit to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is a lot of good information. I mean, James and I have now done a number of different podcasts, and I think each of those cover most of the issues. But the biggest issues in international estate planning, twofold, is that the first issue that I find the most stressful is that if you don't have a will and you have children in America and you're not a citizen, then and you pass away, then your children can become wards of the state, right? So anyone that has children and doesn't have a will should run out tomorrow and get a will. The second point is around the way a will gets probated. You can have a will in Australia that's effective for America, but what has to happen is when you die, the will has to be probated in Australia first, and then it has to become and registered and accepted in New York in order to deal with, or New York, or wherever you are in America, to deal with whatever other assets you have in the States. So there can be some timing constraints around, practically how do you manage that. So, I mean, I'm telling everyone right now that has, absolutely look at your wills, and think about whether it makes sense to have one in the US if you don't have one.
And Peter, just to finally ask, what would you say is the number one question your clients are asking you right now?
No one's worried about paying the IRS right now. I'll tell you what, they're not sitting there saying, oh, the IRS needs more money. So the last couple of months it's been heavily focused on, we do a lot of business work, so it's been heavily focused on, stimulus, accessing stimulus. And then it's been, then it probably has been around the residency stuff. I mean, there's been a lot of people that are, this seems to be one of those defining moments where people are like, okay, should be this be the moment that I return back to Australia? For me personally, Zjantelle's helping me with my green card at the moment, and I've actually gone the flip side. I mean, I want to become a citizen now, because I'm like, what, the country's having challenges. Now's not the time to leave. I love this country. I love the people, and the best way I can make a difference and be helpful is to have the right to vote. So that's my input, and I would say to any Aussie on here that feels the same way about America and loves it as much as I do, that you should do the same thing, regardless of the tax impact.
Well, Peter, look, thank you so much. I know you've got to jump on another call with some clients, but we do appreciate your time, and we should definitely get together and do another podcast. When we've got a little bit more, understanding of what's going on right now, because I know a lot of things are in flux. Peter, what's the best way to reach you?
If you just hit me up on my email, which is peter@asenaadvisors.com. That's
ASENA Advisors, correct?
Yep, correct.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Hey, Zjantelle, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? How's everybody? Hopefully everybody's good that's on here.
I know a lot of people on the call have some pretty important immigration questions, and the first thing I want to start off with is about the imminent presidential proclamation. I know this sort of surfaced last Thursday, about a week ago, talking about the banning of entry of non-immigrant visa holders to the US, and there was concern that the E3 may be wrapped up in that. I know there hasn't been any news since, but perhaps you could just speak to that very quickly.
I think, the annoying part about our current administration is that we have alarm bells that ring before proclamations are actually made. So it sends a lot of people into a lot of stress and worry. From what we've seen so far, it doesn't seem like the E3 visa will be embroiled in that, hopefully. It seems like the E3 is one that is relatively protected. If anything, I think the categories that may be affected are the H-1B OPT, which is for students after they finish their studies at university. They get a year where they can do OPT. They're talking about eliminating that program or shortening it, because some students that study STEM subjects get a longer OPT. So I think they're going to reduce that back to 1 year instead of the additional 18 months that STEM students were getting on top of their 1 year of OPT. And there was rumblings that also the L visa might be affected. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I know there are a lot of Australians that are on Ls or looking for Ls. We are in the process of doing a number of Ls at the moment. So, we are anxious to also see what this proclamation will say, because the best way for us to be able to plan ahead is knowing what's in it. So we're hoping that by the end of June, we'll have a little bit more clarity. And, I'm happy to, get on and sort of explain what that means for all of our Australians and any of our viewers, what it actually means when it does come out. Because sometimes, when it comes out, there are certain things and exemptions, and maybe we might miss something. So I'm happy to explain it when it does.
Yeah, I think we've done 3 videos in 6 weeks. So there's just so many, and each time there's something new or something's changed. So it's pretty scary, which sort of leads me into the next probably 2 questions. And that is around the scenario of someone who is either on an E3 or is about to get it, who was on an existing E3, needs to renew it, or that they want to move to a new employer. Now, obviously, there are no appointment times anywhere other than emergency appointments in Australia, but you have to be in Australia to be able to get one of those appointments. And then there's the whole quarantine issue, and that's a whole nother layer of complexity, especially since they've now announced that they're going to be charging for quarantines. It's not unexpected, but at the same time, it's just another layer of complexity. So we want to sort of look at the 2 scenarios. One is that you're getting a new E3, either through a new employer or an existing employer. Do we go the way of the I-129 here in the US? Or do we do what a lot of people are doing, flying to Australia, doing the quarantine, waiting for the quarantine to then file for a mail-in visa? And who is eligible to actually ask for a mail-in visa?
Let's break it down. So let's start with change of employer, perhaps. Because if you file with USCIS in the US, you can't start working for that employer until the application or petition actually gets approved. So what I think I'd like to explain, which I think a lot of people haven't comprehended yet, is that when we file an I-129 with USCIS, it's a different government agency to Department of State, which is who adjudicates your visa when you go to a consulate abroad. So when you go to the consulate in Australia or anywhere else and they're adjudicating your E3, they're looking at it and they're making a decision within 5 minutes of having the documents in front of them. Those consulates typically don't adjudicate very many visa categories. The only other visa category that they adjudicate is an E2, and sometimes if it's a blanket L. But otherwise, people are going to the consulates with approval notices of their case already having been approved by USCIS in the US. And then the consulate's just really putting the visa in the passport and checking the person, taking their fingerprints, checking that they're not a terrorist or haven't violated terms of their visa. But they're not adjudicating whether that person actually qualifies for the visa, usually, except for if it's an E3 and they're determining whether you qualify for the visa. So that when they're adjudicating it, I feel like they're not looking at it, the documents, as in depth as when you file with USCIS. So USCIS, that's what they're built for, is to receive visa petitions and look at them and adjudicate them very strictly and narrowly. So what we're seeing with the E3s is they are definitely concentrating on the concept of specialty occupation when an E3 is filed with USCIS. And the reason for this is that the E3 regulations state that the definition of specialty occupation should follow the definition of specialty occupation under H1Bs. So the immigration officers at USCIS that adjudicate the E3s are H1B officers that usually adjudicate H1Bs. So the H1Bs have been under scrutiny over the last few years, and cases that would typically not have gotten requests for evidence, say 4 or 5 years ago, are getting a lot of requests for evidence. And so the E3s are following suit. And the way that they are questioning specialty occupation is that years ago, you could say this job requires a degree in, let's say, marketing or related field, and they would accept that. But now they're narrowing the definition of specialty occupation to being, it requires only a degree in one specific field. So, for example, if you are a lawyer, a dentist, an engineer, an architect, those are great cases to file in the US because they are definitely specialty occupations. You can't do it without a degree in law for lawyer, dentistry for dentist, engineering, architecture, so on, right? But if you're in a field like marketing or finance or business development or market research, or actually we filed a case for an industrial engineer, which I thought would be pretty clear cut that you need a degree in industrial engineering. What they're doing is they're coming back, they're looking at what's called the Occupational Outlook Handbook, OOH. They look up the classification that your job comes under in the OOH. And if the OOH says a degree in engine, if they list more than one degree in the OOH for that occupation, they'll come back and say this isn't a specialty occupation because a number of degrees can be used for this job. So I'll give you an example. For our industrial engineer that we filed, industrial designer, sorry, that we filed, they came back with saying, well, we don't believe that this is a specialty occupation because the OOH says that you could do this job with a degree in industrial design, architecture, or engineering. So prove to us that only a degree in industrial design will work for this job. And the evidence that they want, they list the type of evidence they want. They want to know that everyone in the position prior to the current candidate has had that specific degree. Show us that degree and payroll evidence to show that they actually work there. Go to similarly situated companies, get evidence that the other companies for their industrial designers require only a degree in industrial design and so on. So if you're going to file within the US, the benefit, and this applies for an extension as well, actually, the benefit of an extension is that you can continue working while this petition is getting adjudicated. For a change of employer, you can't, and you've got to wait for it to get for the final adjudication. And if you're going to get a request for evidence, the requests for evidence aren't coming until about 6 weeks in, and then they give you 3 months to respond to that request for evidence because the amount of evidence that you need to give is so much. So now you're at 4 months down the line and you still haven't been able to start with this new employer. So I think that if you are changing employers, the way that you can best control and have some sort of control over the situation right now is to go back to Australia, because you know that you'll be able to get back within about 4 or 5 weeks. So you could say to your employer, I know that I'd be able to start in about 4 or 5 weeks if I go back to Australia. If we file here, I don't know, unless it's a slam dunk, E3 case. But even then it doesn't have premium processing and you don't really have control over when they're going to adjudicate it by. If you're going to Australia, you know that you're going to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. You can't do the mail-in while you're in quarantine. So you'll be sending the application in for mail-in as soon as you come out of quarantine, and they say that it will take up to 15 days. We've been seeing our longest one so far has taken 8 days, so that's good, and it was a concurrent E3. So they were adjudicating 2 E3s at once, and they beautifully annotated the visa with both employers. The other thing that we have been doing is, if the person has any reason why they can't do a mail-in, is requesting an emergency appointment. And as long as you have a letter from your employer and outlining some good and compelling reasons as to why they really need you back in the US, we are generally seeing those emergency appointments getting approved. So that's good, and people going to their appointments and being able to do it. So, James, I'll address the other question as to who can do a mail-in. So you can do a mail-in as long as the visa you're applying for is in the same visa class as the last visa you just got. So if you're on an E3, you can go and do the mail-in for another E3. But if you're changing visa categories, you can't do the mail-in. In addition to it having to be the same visa class, there are a few other exceptions, and I've just got my cheat sheet here, so I'll just read them out so I don't leave any off. But you cannot have previously ever lost a visa or had a visa, a passport, I guess, stolen, or a visa revoked. You cannot have changed your name since the last time you got your visa. So we're facing this at the moment, actually, with a client who got married and had changed her name. So we're going to do an emergency appointment for her instead. You cannot have previously been refused a visa or entry to the United States. So if you've been to a consulate before and ever been refused a visa, even if it was something silly, then you're not eligible for the mail-in and or entry to the United States. Even if that was on ESTA, sometimes people have gone through a time where they tried to come in on ESTA, were refused entry, then they've subsequently got visas and had no problem. But because of that one-time refusal of entry, they wouldn't be able to do the mail-in. You cannot have had any arrests or convictions. So when you're completing your GS-160, if you do have yes there for arrests, you're not able to do the mail-in, but you can, in that instance, we would be requesting the emergency appointment again. And then you also need to be in Australia to do the mail-in. That's a question I've gotten, which is, can I just mail my passport to Australia and one of my family members do the mail-in there? That's not possible. You need to be in the district of consular district or country of where you're going to be doing the mail-in. So we have a client actually that is really wants to travel to Greece, and she's going to hang out for the summer in Athens, and we have looked into doing the mail-in there. Whether she goes through with it or not is going to depend on whether she can get back from Greece, because right now there's the ban on entry to the US from Europe. But if that ban lifts, then I think we're going to attempt the mail-in there as well. And if the ban doesn't lift, then she'll go to Australia, do the 2 weeks quarantine and mail in there. But she doesn't want to go to Australia in the winter anyway, so she wants to spend the summer in Greece anyway. So that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Is that because there's a consulate open in Greece that she's doing it? She can do a mail-in in Greece?
It's not open yet, but you can book appointments right now in August, and she plans to be there then. I don't know if that appointment will stick, because we did have appointments booked in Bahamas for July and August, and all of those got cancelled. So that's another variable. But she knows all the variables, and she's willing to give it a shot. Right now we have someone booked in Paris on July 7th, and that has not been cancelled yet. They're already in Paris. But the hurdle there is getting back out of there. So even if they go through with it, they'll have to go to Australia or somewhere and sit 14 days somewhere else, a country where you can come to the US from, before entering the US. So,
right. So obviously that sort of answered questions 1 through 4.
Okay, sorry, I went too quick. I thought too much.
No, that's okay. I mean, these are the sort of the questions that people want to understand, because they are facing that situation of, obviously if someone has never filed an E3 before, then they have no shot of going to Australia and asking for a mail-in, because they never held that visa before.
Yeah.
So they have to go through
I think another important thing, I think one of the most, the common questions, I know you asked Peter, what's the most common question that you're getting at the moment? For me, it's really, should I be doing the mail-in? Should I be trying to file it from here? Or should I be trying to request an emergency? And I think even if you're a renewal, be cautious of filing the I-129 in the US, again, unless you're one of those slam dunk professions. The other things that you want to keep into consideration, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself from the video and people have seen that, but if your company has less than 25 employees, made less than 5 million, and is less than 5 years old, then typically you will also get a request for evidence based on the nature. It's called a vibe RFE, so they want business validation. So they'll come back and say, well, we want to see the lease, the office space of this place. We want to see payroll records to show that this office is actually operating. We want to see. So that's another time where people want to be cautious if there's not very many employees, and especially if you are the only employee, don't file an I-129 in the US unless you're a lawyer and you don't have you'd only be practicing law and that's it. But because if there's only one employee listed on that I-129, they will say that the person could not possibly be doing only the specialty occupation. and they'll say who's been taking care of the administrative tasks of running the business. And if you don't have anyone you can show, they'll say that, well, then you're doing everything there, and you can't be doing everything. You're only allowed to be doing the duties of the specialty occupation, and that's it. So that's just another warning for everyone who might be the only employee or only one of a couple of employees at their E3 company or any company with respect to filing a renewal in the US.
Well, Zjantelle, thank you so much again. Yeah, I seem to sound like I'm saying this every week. Feels like I'm saying it thank you every week to you, but thank you again. What is the best way for someone to contact your office if they did want to make an appointment or etc.?
Yeah, I think you can contact me directly at Zjantelle Cammisa Markel, but also an easier email address, because I know my name is complicated, is info, I-N-F-O, at Cammisa Markel, and Cammisa Markel is C-A, 2 M's, MMISAMARKEL.com. And if you send it to that one, more than myself and Madeline also gets that email, and because I'm in consults often all day long, back to back, you might get a quicker reply if you use that email address as well, just because I often don't get to emails until later in the evening.
Well, Zjantelle, I know you might be sticking around a little bit longer to listen to a few more things. In fact, we have a wonderful performance coming up by Amelia Cormack. Amelia, are you there? But before I switch to Amelia, Zjantelle, again, thank you so much, and hopefully your family's bringing you back a doggy bag or something from dinner.
Yeah, hope so. It's my pleasure, James. And again, if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We love helping the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amelia.
Hi, James.
Hey, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Good. So how are things in Brooklyn?
Well, actually, I'm in Harlem. I'm in Hamilton Heights. So, yeah, they're pretty good. We've got Riverside Park 2 blocks away. So, been taking advantage and having some picnics, socially distant picnics with some friends, which has been really nice.
No, that's great. It's all about social distancing right now.
Exactly.
So, Amelia, can you tell us a little bit about what you're singing tonight for us? And
I'm going to be singing a version of Blue Sky Mine that the incomparable Genevieve Lemon sang as a ballad. And I've just been thinking a lot about what's gone on back home and the destruction of the caves in the Junker Gorge in the Pilbara by Rio Tinto. And I also just have always loved this song and Genevieve's version of it. So I thought I'd do a little Australiana for all my fellow Aussies out there.
Okay, well, without further ado, we're going to cross over to Australian singer, songwriter, composer, Amelia Cormack. Thank you.
My gut is wrenched out, it is crunched up and broken. My life that is lived is no more than a token. Strike the flint upon the stone and tell me why. If I yell out at night, the reply is blue silence. The screen is no comfort, I can't speak my sentence. Through the lights of heaven's gate, and I don't know why. But if I walk all day on the blue sky line, there'll be food on the table tonight. Still I walk up and down on the blue sky line, there'll be pay in your pocket tonight. Candy store poppers like to the shambles, twisting their fingers, they pay the truth makers. Balance sheet is breaking up the sky. So I'm caught at the junction, still waiting for medicine. Sweat from my brow keeps on feeding the engine. The crumbs in my pocket can keep me for another hour. Who's gonna save me? But if I walk all day on a blue sky mine, there'll be food on the table tonight. And if I walk up and down on a blue sky mine, there'll be rain in your pocket tonight. Some have sailed from the distant shore, and the company takes what the company wants. Nothing's as precious as a hole in the ground. Who's gonna save me? Who's gonna save me? In the end, the rain comes down. In the end, the rain comes down. Washes clean the streets of the blue sky town. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
And Amelia, we're going to be making an announcement a little bit later in the evening, and
Right.
we'd like to let everyone know that your performance tonight is one of the first donations we are receiving to this new fund. So thank you for that.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for asking me, James, and thank you for providing this amazing service to, you know, I as this Aussie who moved here myself and on a green card going for my citizenship, it's so important to have the support. So thank you.
And Amelia, tell us, how do people find you on Instagram, Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, Amelia Cormack, all one word, so AmeliaCormack. And I've got albums out there and stuff on iTunes, on Spotify, so come find me. And yeah.
And download lots of music. So
yeah, and also I have my website, my brand new website that I worked on during quarantine, which is just ameliacormack.com. So you can check out all my stuff.
Great. Thanks, Amelia. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jack Manning Bancroft, are you on board?
Gotcha. I'm here.
Jack, well, how long has it been? 2016, I think, was the last time we caught up.
Yep. Yeah, about 4 years ago now.
Great. Jack, perhaps what you could do first of all to everyone is introduce yourself, talk about AIM, and also specifically about what you're doing in other countries and here in the US.
Sure. So 16 years ago, I started a program to try and work out how we could break this divide between people with power and people without power, between people that were divided into races, into different backgrounds, that didn't know how to have conversations and how to, I suppose, build that empathetic framework so we don't design worlds where we see so many people left behind. And the model was basing out of universities. We gather a bunch of university students together who were destined to go off and get their degrees and end up in the upper echelons of society in a number of different places, and try and work with the most marginalised kids that were being left behind in Australia. That's our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids. So my family's Aboriginal through my mum's side and white through my dad's side. So I grew up with these two worlds sort of combined, and felt like if we were going to change the way the world existed, we had to try and find a way to gather together, hopefully in a space where we had the freedom to imagine new realities and then try and build it. So that was with 25 kids in 2005. I was 19 at the time. And then since then, we've worked with 20,000 kids, Indigenous kids around Australia. We're now in 6 countries around the world. So when we met in 2016, we were about to launch globally and take the model to give the chance for young marginalised kids in universities to be a lead mentor, to then gather 100 or so university students and then go back and work with 100 or so marginalised kids in their communities. So it sort of really builds that you have a leader who's come out of a marginalised background, who's suddenly a lot of kids, university kids who are from potentially privileged backgrounds who may not have spent time with those, that demographic, gets to see this incredible leader who's leading and organising. And we know the Obama story of his apprenticeship of being an organiser and leading change. And So we give that stage for that young college kid, give that stage for that to be a safe space for those college kids coming out of privilege to come together, and then we work with those marginalised kids. So it's not a traditional saviour mentality. It's really based in sort of lifting up the strengths of the role models that are out there. And in the last 4 years since we met, so I stood on a stage in New York at Chelsea Piers and said, we think we can be one of the groups that transforms the planet. We think if it's not going to be us, then who? And if it's not going to be now, then when? And since then, have now scaled to 6 countries. We're in Uganda, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and we're also working in about 5 to 10 universities in America. We're in the space of sort of kickstarting and rolling that off. And I'm back in Australia at the moment. And what AIM looks like now, we're 16 years in, is, I'm sure everybody knows that Black Lives Matter movement has really lifted up again and it's sort of so sad that we're still in a place where we're screaming for the most basic of human rights for people of colour and people who are left outside the margins, like the most basic fundamental of human rights. And back home in Australia and a number of places we're working, like, you've just got kids who and whole communities and whole worlds that are ignored by the system that we've designed, and working out how we can redesign that has been my life's work to date, and trying to sit down and reach out a hand to people with power in government and in corporations and try and work out how we can redesign the way the world works as part of that, and then lifting up those kids so they enter it. So that's our framework. And then moving forward, the gig for us is trying to work out how we build this network of hooded scholars around the world in university campuses across the planet, then work with teachers to set up this imaginative framework in schools so we don't miss so many kids and have so many kids outside the margins and have a need for AIM to drop in. And the third one is we just work on culture as well. So we have a clothing line. We work on creating stories that try and redefine our narrative and work out how we can build a hopeful agenda. So it's sort of the 3 pockets that we play within.
Well, Jack, specifically to that, obviously anyone who hasn't been watching the news, it would be, completely, you have to have lived under a rock to not know that there is a huge swell of support for the Black Lives Matter movement, not only here in the US, but obviously around the world, and it's obviously being felt in Australia as well. I think that the challenge for a lot of, and this is the feedback I'm getting from our members, is that, they obviously the first thing in reaction is to go out and march in the street, which is great, but people want to do something that's of a more constructive nature. They want to see something that they can participate in that will end up with tangible results. Now, I know we've had this conversation several times, and we're actually making the announcement tonight that we're starting a fundraising campaign. Now, this is on the back of the $500,000 that we've raised in the last 5 months for the Australian bushfires, and it was $510,600 odd that we've raised since January 4th. That's money that we've raised and sent to Australia in conditional grants. So essentially, we've supported organisations like WIRES, the Australian Wildlife Warriors, the New South Wales and Victorian Fire Service, and the Country Fire Service of South Australia. So this money has gone back, and these organisations report back to us with grant use reports. So we can then share that information back with our donors through our social media, so people can actually see the real work that's being done through their donations. And I think that's also a missing component that's resonating very well with our donors, is that they actually do see the good work that's coming back. So, Jack, we're launching a campaign tonight. The website will be going live at about 9 o'clock tonight, where we're going to be focusing on raising money for our education program. It's one of our original programs that we made part of our 501c3 back in 2012 when we filed. And we'll be supporting AIM as one of the organizations here in New York specifically. And I know we're speaking with Helen about that. One of the universities here in New York will be supporting the mentorship that's going on there, and possibly even getting mentors involved as well. So I think it's all very well for people to put up posts on social media saying Black Lives Matter, but first of all, Black Lives Matter to all Australians, white and Indigenous. And it's also important to give people a way in which they can donate money to a cause or participate in a cause that is actually going to help with education inequality, which resonates obviously back to AIM and the way in which they're creating their mentorship. So great to see you, Jack. Great to speak to you again, but also want to let you know what we're doing here in New York. We're just not putting stuff up on social media. We're actually starting a campaign, and we're going to be actively putting that out to our donors for them to donate to, because I feel that if you have Australians who wanted to participate, they understand our organisation. They see that we've raised a lot of money for the bushfires, so that sort of ticks that checkbox, so to speak. And also to having being able to support programs like the Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience here in New York through their hooded mentors. I think that's just such a great initiative to be part of.
Yeah, very cool, James. And I think the donation side of things is definitely, when you look at the macro economic challenges of how wealth is shared, it's just got to be a key part of it. So I think that's brilliant to have that there. What I'd say in terms of engaging with wanting to see tangible change is, my door's open, our door's open to anyone that wants to try and design different things. So if you're working in organisations, if you're leading organisations, if you're thinking about that third bucket, which is cultural change, we're open to building campaigns together, to building stories together, to working out how we can design different things around employment and using what we've done to try and shift those levers, because I think progress is about big surges of energy and then trying to work on design. And that's where we see ourselves as trying to be that diplomatic group, catching some of the energy and working on a design frame. So just as we sat down, 4 years ago and I've always been open to exploring what it could look like, I'd challenge everybody here to, traditionally we think about the role of the non-profit as the place we can give the donations to. I think one of the great challenges that is coming out of the Black Lives Matter is challenging people to use their privilege and to work out how to do the work, how to use their voice, how to be an advocate. And I'd say come to the table with us with a design, like with a half-formed design or the start of a thought or the beginning of something. I had someone I went to university with who reached out 3 weeks ago, is building this recreation parks around the world, and said, what can we do together? So we're open to it. We're open to building the conversation. If it's not us, we'll try and pass you on to someone globally or locally in the States that we know that is doing fascinating work. So yeah, I think we have to commit to action and then build on top of that parallel support with the financial work as well.
Great. Well, Jack, I'm looking forward to our next conversations over the next few months and the great work that we can do together. And thank you again. I know you're on vacation with your family, so I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us early on Friday morning Australian time.
No holiday from Inequality, unfortunately, James, so we've got plenty of work to do. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jack.
Bye.
Nick Hardcastle.
Yes, James.
There you are. And now for something completely different. Nick, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, I'm a bit tired. I had a huge weekend of cheering and marching and screaming, so my voice is still not fully recovered.
So a lot of people have probably, with all the other things that are happening in the news, this is Pride Month.
Right.
And I know that you are in the Pride March as your alternate ego.
Yes, Nicky No Pants left the house and left his pants at home. So we joined. It wasn't a official LA Pride March. Unfortunately, it got quite political because LA Pride works very closely with the city and with police, and they wouldn't participate in a march without police approval. And of course, as you know, a lot of the Black Lives Matter and all Black Lives Matter marches have been demonstrating against police brutality. So it became kind of a bit of a no-win situation for LA Pride. So board members from LA Pride took it upon themselves to call it the LGBTQ plus supports all Black Lives Matter March. And so it was more of a First Amendment march than a Pride March.
Right. Now I know that parts of Hollywood are opening up over there. I know we spoke about that briefly. Can you talk to a little bit about what's happening now in Hollywood itself?
Yes. So Governor Newsom and Mayor Garcetti lifted restrictions for production on Friday of last week. So this week was the first week back to work for a lot of shows, game shows, and also serial dramas. I know that the Avatar sequels have gone back into production. There's a few other films that have gone back in as well, but of course with very strict pre-shoot quarantine measures and physical distancing, reduced crews, no live studio audiences and things like that. But yes, it is slowly opening up and getting back to whatever this new normal is.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a world shortage of PPE, but there's definitely a world shortage of green screens right now.
Well, I think that that's going to be one of the things that we see in our industry is a lot more VR, a lot more CGI, a lot more green screen stuff. I think wherever they can reduce the amount of extras, for example, they will. You know, you'll probably only see, 3 or 4 people who are in the shot, and the rest will all be populated digitally. I think we'll see a lot of things being shot on green screen with locations being keyed in later, as opposed to, traveling crews and casts all around different places where there might be risk of them, again, either being infected or needing to go into quarantine again from one location to the next. So this is going to have a long sort of lasting impact, I think, on the way that television and film is produced.
You're obviously very much involved with the Australian theatre productions there. I mean, what is happening there? Is it socially distancing audiences, or it's just simply just a no-go right now?
It's a no-go right now. It's really frustrating because I also have a festival that I run every year, September, October, and it seemed that we could have been very confident that September, October would have been safe to open up a smaller venue. My theatre only seats 100 people.
Right.
But even now, it's still not looking conclusive either way. We haven't had a significant enough reduction in cases for a consistent amount of time for us to confidently say by September we'll be able to open the doors. So at this stage, no live entertainment of any kind. Restaurants are open for dine-in now, but no bars. So you can only go somewhere where food is served to have a drink. And again, no live entertainment anywhere. So I know that some people are going to be desperate to get back into the theatre. I certainly am, but I also do know that it's going to be very difficult to get other people to come out and sit in a room full of strangers, whether they have face coverings on or not. It's been so long now, and this has been such a real thing that culturally it's going to take quite some time, I think, to get audiences back.
Yeah, I keep talking about the new economy, and really, you have to look at your business. And I interviewed with Julie Stahl, who's the CEO of a creative agency here in New York, Blonde & Co. And she was saying that, you have to think about plan B, plan C, plan D, what if?
Yeah. I think that this time that we've been in has, what the old saying is, necessity is a master of invention, or something like that. We've all had to pivot some way, whether that's just the way that we communicate with our friends and family, or the way that we do our work. And I've been involved with some really great projects that I would not have been involved with had this not happened. So I've workshopped a musical with kids all over the world. We had kids in Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, here in the US. And that was a wonderful thing, wonderful project to be a part of. I've been doing Zoom consults with people that probably wouldn't have thought to call me up and say, can we do this? Because we weren't used to working that way. It was a matter of like sitting in the room together. And so I've been invited to be a part of things that probably wouldn't have occurred if it weren't for us looking for ways to stay connected and keep working during this time. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I think, looking at this from a technology perspective, if this has happened 12 months ago, we wouldn't have the technology to do half the things that we're doing now. It would have existed, but it would have been expensive or hard to access, or only available to corporates, not the consumer. So, in a way, the cultural shift that we're seeing in the use of technology, other than just looking at our screens for the latest news feed, is really, quite changing and is positive in many ways.
It is, and haven't we seen an incredible increase in the speed that technology has been delivered to us, because it's become such a need, as opposed to, wouldn't this be a great idea? It's like, no, we need this now. Yeah. And
it's funny also too that a lot of businesses now are actually seeing productivity because they don't have to invest in that new larger office to accommodate the employees, and employees aren't having, especially in the New York area, probably in LA, it probably takes you 50 minutes to travel 3 miles in peak hour. So yeah. Having that commute, not having all that time taken up, and I think they're actually seeing some productivity gains from employees. So,
yeah, look, that's probably true. I mean, personally, I I like to work with people. I think that it boosts morale and therefore that does boost productivity. I get fatigued by looking at screens and talking to people all day. It gets really exhausting. I don't know if it's like an actual energy drain or if it's just something that I experience. But I think when the pendulum sort of starts to swing back, we're all going to realize that we do need like human interaction and human company and like in the flesh, in person, in real life. So this will all be worthwhile, but I think we're going to find a point where we're going to need it.
Exactly.
For our souls, I think.
Hopefully in the not too distant future. But so Nick, look, thanks again for dialing in. Thank you again for all your assistance on and Zoom Day. That was a great day.
Oh, that was my pleasure. I got up at 5 a.m. for that.
Well, you know, it was a dawn event. Well,
it was a crack of dawn event.
12 o'clock.
It was wonderful. Thank you for involving me.
Which kind of leads us into our next segment, which is our world famous trivia competition.
I just want to say something back to Rebecca Carmen, who says the introverts disagree. Yes, I know the introverts are killing it right now, Rebecca. And I'm not an introvert. I am a ENFP. And I'm really looking forward to being out with people again, I have to say.
As we all are, Nick. I mean, we tonight we were supposed to have our June networking event. We would have had 150 people in a room with drinks at the corporate offices of HSBC in Midtown, but unfortunately, you know, this has all happened. So what we were very lucky in having was our Ausday NYC event in January before this all hit. So you know, hopefully through this and other events, we're going to keep engaged with our members. But again, thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you, James, and thanks for all that you do to keep those members engaged and informed.
Hopefully you can stick around for just to watch a few of the questions. I think you'll appreciate it.
Okay, I will.
Now I'm going to cross to my able assistant who's been very patient there in the background. Tilly, are you there?
Hello, I am indeed.
Tilly, thank you again so much for your assistance today. I also want to send a shout out to my wife, Jamie, who has been incredibly patient with me. You can appreciate that these things do take a little bit of organization and you know, when you're in the throes of 10 minutes before screen time and you still got things to do, I really do appreciate her patience with me. So a big shout out to my wife, Jamie. Tilly, again, thank you so much for your assistance. Thank you, Zjantelle. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Amelia. And thank you again to my wife. And thank you once again, everyone, for all of your assistance tonight. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be safe.